almost everyone has been awakened, upset, or disturbed by his dreams. Our sleep does not appear to be protected from the contents of the unconscious. We've all experienced that sudden jolt of waking from a nightmare, heart pounding, out of breath, the frightening images still vivid in our minds. While unsettling, this experience is an essential part of the human condition, a stark reminder of the powerful forces that stir beneath the surface of our waking consciousness. In this series, guided by the insights of Carl Jung, we are descending into the underworld of dreams. In our first 2 episodes, we've seen that dreams are symbolic messages sent up from the depths of our unconscious mind. Now we turn to nightmares, dreams where the unconscious erupts into awareness with an unsettling intensity, confronting us with its most enigmatic and feared force, the shadow. This series is presented by Mirror, the dream interpretation app meant to discover the depths of your subconscious. Begin your journey today at the link in the description. To understand nightmares within a Jungian framework, we must first grasp his concept of the shadow. The shadow is everything that the subject refuses to acknowledge about himself, a composite of all the aspects of ourselves that we have deemed unacceptable, unworthy, or too threatening to integrate into our conscious identity. But Jung reminds us, the shadow is a living part of the personality and therefore wants to live with it in some form. It cannot be argued out of existence or rationalized into harmlessness. The shadow, then, is an integral part of who we are, a part that demands to be acknowledged. And the less it is acknowledged, the darker and denser it becomes. These rejected elements of the psyche accumulate over time, forming a kind of hidden double, an unseen presence that lurks just behind the carefully curated image we project to the world. For instance, a child who was shamed for their competitive and aggressive drive may learn to suppress these instincts, adopting a passive or overly accommodating persona. Yet beneath the surface, those buried impulses remain in the shadow and emerge in unconscious ways, through envy or sudden outbursts of anger. Plato once remarked that in all of us, even those that are the most respectable, there is a lawless, wild beast nature which appears in sleep. But the shadow is also a wellspring of untapped potential. When we push certain qualities away or deny them, they don't vanish. Instead, they lie dormant in the unconscious, waiting to be rediscovered and integrated. The very traits we suppress often hold the key to our growth and authenticity. For example, someone who suppresses their assertiveness might struggle to speak up for their needs or set healthy boundaries. However, by integrating this repressed quality, they can reconnect with their ability to stand firm, express themselves confidently, and advocate for their needs. The repressed traits locked away in the shadow are untapped sources of strength and potential, waiting for integration. Once embraced, these qualities can lead to greater wholeness, helping individuals reclaim the power they've unknowingly suppressed. The integration of the shadow is therefore not just an exercise in self-acceptance, it is a crucial step towards psychological balance and personal growth. But the shadow is elusive, and rather than confronting it directly, we often project it onto others. The psychological defense mechanism of projection allows us to avoid acknowledging our own faults by attributing them to the external world. We see our shadow reflected in the people we judge, dislike, or even fear, the politician we despise, the co-worker who irritates us, the stranger whose presence unnerves us. All may in some way be carrying an element of our own denied nature. For example, someone who is deeply insecure about their intelligence may project this fear outward, labeling others as foolish or incompetent while remaining blind to their own self-doubt. The meeting with ourselves belongs to the more unpleasant things that can be avoided, so long as we can project everything negative into the environment. Despite our best efforts to suppress or externalize the shadow, it does not remain dormant. It longs for integration, for recognition, for the light of consciousness. And when it is ignored for too long, it finds a way to force its presence into our awareness. One of the most direct and unsettling ways it does this is through nightmares. In the first 2 episodes of this series, we saw that dreams are messages that emerge spontaneously from our unconscious psyche, without our conscious control, and show us the unvarnished, natural truth when our consciousness has strayed too far from its foundations and run into an impasse. But if dreams are messages from the unconscious, then nightmares are its urgent warnings. When we repress aspects of ourselves that demand recognition, the shadow fights back with increasing intensity. Think of nightmares as the psyche's alarm bells, clanging loudly to alert us to something vital that demands our attention. Nightmares are the psyche's attempt to force a breakthrough in our conscious defenses, akin to a pressure cooker reaching its limit. The shadow is actively striving for integration, pushing against the resistance of the ego. A nightmare is our psyche showing us what our ego fears and despises most, to bring us to wrestle and come to terms with it. Marie-Louise von Franz, one of Jung's closest collaborators, described nightmares this way. Nightmares are vitally important dreams. They wake us up with a cry. They are the electroshock nature uses on us when nature wants to wake us up. The waking up point of the dream means the bang with which the unconscious says, "Now, that is it. Now, attend to that." And so the nightmare is really shock therapy. It wants to shock us out of a deep unconscious sleepiness about some dangerous situation. This dangerous situation isn't necessarily an external threat, but more often an internal one. A dangerous imbalance within the psyche itself, a perilous disregard for some essential aspect of our being. Nightmares are meant to jolt us into awareness, forcing us to confront the aspects of ourselves we have long avoided. When we wake up in a cold sweat from a particularly disturbing dream, our first instinct may be to push it away, to reassure ourselves that it was just a dream. But from a Jungian perspective, nightmares are anything but trivial. They represent a moment of rupture in our waking denial, a forced encounter with what has been festering beneath the surface. This rupture is not a malfunction. It is a necessary disruption, a forceful intervention by the unconscious to prevent a more catastrophic psychological breakdown. The nightmare in this sense is a preventative measure, albeit a harsh one. Indeed, an important feature of nightmares is that they often jolt us awake. They disrupt our sleep, leaving us shaken, disoriented, and sometimes struggling to return to a calm state. This disturbance isn't accidental. It's a way of forcing confrontation with the shadow. The nightmare refuses to be ignored. It demands that we acknowledge what's being presented. It's the unconscious saying, "You cannot continue to sleep through this." This disruption of sleep mirrors the disruption that needs to occur in our blind conscious attitudes. Nightmares are, forgive the pun, the shadow's call to awakening. From a Jungian perspective, nightmares are not just about fear, although fear is often the dominant emotion. They are fundamentally about encounters with the unacceptable, encounters with our shadow. Sometimes the shadow manifests in nightmares in a direct personification as a threatening figure, a monster, a ghostly presence, or an animal stalking us in the dark. This is perhaps the shadow's most classic manifestation in nightmares. This figure embodies the visceral qualities we find unacceptable about ourselves: rage, animality, ugliness, manifesting in exaggerated or terrifying forms. This personification is a carefully crafted symbolic representation, drawing on both personal and collective imagery. A dragon, for instance, might represent not only personal fears, but also the archetypal terrible mother, the devouring aspect of the unconscious. The act of personification itself is a key dynamic in nightmares. The shadow, which in waking life might exist as a vague sense of unease or a collection of repressed impulses, takes on a concrete form, a tangible presence that demands to be reckoned with. This is a way for the unconscious to make the unknown real, to give the shadow a face and a voice, forcing the dreamer to confront it directly. The nightmare, through personification, transforms an internal, often nebulous conflict into an externalized drama, a battle between the ego and the shadow. Within the nightmare itself, there is often a sense of being trapped, chased, or overwhelmed, with no possibility of escape. This reflects the shadow's insistent demand for attention. It cannot be ignored, rationalized away, or easily dismissed. The nightmare forces a confrontation with the shadow, whether the dreamer is ready for it or not. This sense of inescapability is a crucial part of the nightmare's unsettling power. The shadow will not be denied. We can see this most obviously in the common nightmare theme of the pursuit. The dreamer is not merely in a dangerous situation, they are being hunted, relentlessly followed by a threatening figure or force that embodies the disowned aspects of the self. It's an active drive by the shadow to close the distance between itself and the conscious ego. The feeling of being chased, of constantly looking over one's shoulder, is a visceral manifestation of the shadow's unwavering demand for recognition. But the shadow can also manifest in more well-known and defined characters, such as the homeless person, the prostitute, or the criminal. They evoke the parts of ourselves that we consider shameful, those aspects that exist on the periphery of our moral and social consciousness. The homeless figure, for example, might represent feelings of abandonment or helplessness. The prostitute might symbolize self-degradation and unacknowledged desires, while the criminal could embody the resentful and violent parts of us that have turned against societal norms. But in our nightmares, the shadow doesn't always remain a distant figure. Sometimes we become the shadow ourselves. We may find ourselves committing acts that we thought we'd never be capable of, hurtful words, betrayal, selfishness, or violence. In these moments, the boundary between the conscious self and the shadow blurs, and we are forced to reckon with the darker aspects of our own character. These actions can take us by surprise when we act in ways that seem alien or contradictory to our conscious self-image. In such instances, we might embody the very figure we once feared or rejected. This is the ultimate confrontation with the shadow, to realize that we too are capable of the qualities we once projected outward. But the shadow emerges in nightmares not only as a character or as ourselves, but also through the experience of unacceptable emotions. Nightmares often force us to feel emotions that we habitually avoid or deny in waking life. The overwhelming terror, the suffocating helplessness, the burning shame, they're real emotions, connected to real aspects of ourselves that we've relegated to our shadow. Indeed, these emotions arise in response to imbalances in our waking psyche. If we refuse to acknowledge our own vulnerability in daily life, we might experience nightmares of being exposed or utterly powerless. If we suppress our anger, our nightmares might erupt with scenes of uncontrollable violence. This is not to say that nightmares are easily deciphered. Their symbolism is often complex, multi-layered, and highly personal. A dream of being chased, for example, might represent avoidance of a particular emotional truth, but it might also reflect a broader struggle with confrontation, a fear of one's own capacity for aggression. Jungian dream analysis does not rely on rigid one-size-fits-all interpretations, but instead encourages an introspective approach. What personal associations does the dreamer have with the images? How does the nightmare relate to the challenges the dreamer is currently facing in his life? Mirror helps you answer these questions by understanding your nightmares and dreams in connection with your unique personality and experiences. Mirror is meant to help you understand your dreams based on who you are, and understand who you are based on your dreams. The more you understand your dreams, the better you understand yourself, creating a continuous cycle of insight and growth. Ultimately, the nightmare is not an enemy but a messenger. It carries within it the keys to understanding ourselves more deeply, to confronting what we have long denied, and to reclaiming the parts of ourselves that have been lost in the darkness. By facing the shadow instead of running from it, we move toward a richer, more integrated existence, one in which we are not ruled by fear, but guided by a deeper, more authentic knowledge of who we truly are. Everyone carries a shadow, and the less it is actualized in the individual's conscious life, the darker and denser it becomes. The more we resist the shadow, the more forceful and disturbing our nightmares are likely to become. The unconscious, in its striving for wholeness, will not be silenced. It will escalate its attempts to communicate, using the powerful language of nightmares to break through our defenses. The journey prompted by a nightmare is rarely an easy or comfortable one, but it is, at its core, a journey of profound transformation. To begin the journey of working with our nightmares, we must fundamentally shift our perspective. Instead of approaching nightmares with the instinctive reactions of fear and avoidance, we need to cultivate an attitude of curiosity, understanding, and most importantly, a willingness to engage with what they reveal. As Jungian analyst James A. Hall reminds us, the compensations against a reluctant ego are usually more severe than the complementary relationship of the unconscious to an ego that is doing its best to participate consciously in the individuation process. The goal, therefore, is to shift from a position of resistance and avoidance to one of active participation in what Jung called the individuation process. The individuation process is a lifelong journey, a gradual unfolding of the self, a movement towards becoming a whole, authentic individual. Becoming whole means integrating the shadow, welcoming it into the totality of our self. It means to recognize the shadow's presence in our lives, to engage with it rather than repress it, and to accept that the qualities we fear and reject most in ourselves may also hold great power and potential. This does not mean surrendering to every impulse or instinct the shadow presents, but rather developing a conscious relationship with it. Only by acknowledging both our light and dark sides can we fully claim the richness of our being, unburdened by the limitations of denial or ignorance. Jung's insight, when an inner situation is not made conscious, it happens outside, as fate, reminds us that our inner conflicts, when left unaddressed, manifest as external events. If we continue to resist or flee the shadow, it doesn't just stay locked within us, it will begin to manifest in our lives in concrete ways. These manifestations may show up as disturbed moods, unexplainable behaviors, or crises that force us to confront the very thing we've been running from. When they are approached with curiosity, however, nightmares can become valuable opportunities for self-discovery. Instead of dismissing them or recoiling from their disturbing content, we can engage with them, ask what they are trying to reveal, and use them as a guide toward greater self-awareness. One of the essential elements of this process of shadow integration is cultivating self-compassion. Nightmares often arise from a place of deep internal conflict, a sense of being fractured, incomplete, or at war with ourselves. They offer a unique, albeit often painful, opportunity to embrace the parts of ourselves that we, or others, have taught us to fear, reject, or despise. Instead of viewing our darker emotions, our hidden fears, and our unacknowledged desires as flawed or shameful, we can approach them with compassion, recognizing that they are integral aspects of who we are. One of the ways we can start working with our nightmares is to engage in dialogue or to extend friendship to its seemingly hostile figures. This often leads to their metamorphosis. Beasts can transform into humans, enemies become allies, and often we'll find that these figures have a message to deliver to us. This mirrors the inner process of integrating the shadow. What was once perceived as monstrous and threatening can, through understanding and acceptance, become a source of strength and guidance. This is not about suppressing or distorting the shadow's energy, but about redirecting it, channeling it into constructive and creative outlets. A powerful way to engage in this dialogue with the shadow is called nightmare rescripting. It begins by imaginally re-entering the dream and consciously changing it. Through active imagination, you visualize and relive your nightmare, but this time you change your reaction to it and take ownership of its outcome. For instance, if you dream of being pursued by a monster, you might, in your rescripted version, consciously choose to turn and face the monster. You might ask it questions, seeking to understand its motivations. What do you want? What are you showing me? Why are you here? You might offer it compassion, understanding, or even help. You might visualize the monster transforming, shifting from a figure of terror into something less frightening, perhaps even a helpful guide or a source of strength. This is not about denying your nightmare or pretending it didn't happen. It's really about following your nightmare to its resolution by becoming conscious of your shadow and confronting it voluntarily. The way out is through. As Nietzsche asked us in Beyond Good and Evil, the discipline of suffering, of great suffering, do you not know that it is this discipline alone that has produced all the elevations of humanity so far? If you want to undertake nightmare rescripting in a guided and structured way with complete instructions, Mirror has put together a comprehensive program to help you begin overcoming your nightmares. And Mirror isn't just for nightmares. It's a gateway for cultivating a deeper and more conscious relationship with your dream world and making the unconscious conscious. Try it for yourself at the link in the description. See you inside.